featuring the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. And of course, in the past, we've had a slice about educational leadership, law enforcement officials, including our county attorney, by the way. We've had the prophetic fraternity, the sorority. We've had some good panelists, our educators. Tonight, we'll be talking to our political and community leadership. By the way, we just want to say once again, thank you to Gwen Culpepper-Berry. She's the Chief Diversity Officer at UNI. And we want to thank UNI for its role in spearheading this community-wide effort. And of course, the Community Collaborative, comprised of so many everyday ordinary blues people who bring a labor of love to this great work. We can never thank you enough for the work that you're doing in the community. And tonight we have some wonderful panelists. We want to give each of them an opportunity to introduce themselves to the community. And we'll start with Ms. Kathy Young.
Hello, I'm glad to be here. I am a retired Presbyterian pastor. I'm somebody who moved to Waterloo, over 50 years ago and began teaching at Longfellow School, thinking I would be part of the new generation that would eradicate poverty. And so through my community efforts and church efforts, I have learned a great deal, hopefully made some things that have lasting impact, but I've also made some mistakes. And so this is a wonderful opportunity for me to continue to learn.
Wow, that's fabulous. Okay, so you wanted to eradicate poverty. We have to come back.
Yes, I did.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Mayor Rob Green.
How am I supposed to follow up on that? Name's Rob Green. I'm the mayor of Cedar Falls. I've been in this position since January of this year, so almost all COVID times. And before that, I was a web developer at the University of Northern Iowa, spent 5 years there. And before that, I was on ships like this up in Alaska and Hawaii, or Alaska with the Coast Guard. Also spent time in DC. My wife's from Waterloo originally, and we wanted to settle down near Grandma and Grandpa when I got out of the service. So we've been here since 2004, and it's the first place I've ever felt like home, where I've moved so much as a kid and growing up. Cedar Falls definitely is my hometown. So very happy to be with you tonight for this important discussion.
Yeah, glad you're here. Ms. LaTanya Graves.
Hello, how are you? I am the current president of the Black Hawk County chapter NAACP and a counselor at Bakari Behavioral Health. I've been engaged with my community for the past 25 years, and it's been challenging. However, it's much needed. And so I will continue to fight until the fight leaves me.
Fabulous. Dr. Cissy Bonye.
Thank you. I am Dr. Nafisa Cissé Bonye. I am the Black Hawk County Public Health Director. I've been in my position for 4 years, and it's just been an incredible journey. I consider myself to be home. I'm originally from Niger, West Africa. But for me, home isn't physical. It's really the people that make a place home, especially when it's an environment that is welcoming. And I felt very welcomed here. And so I'm excited to talk about this book. Thank you.
And did you say 4 years, by the way? 4 years?
4 years, yes.
Oh my gosh, 4 years.
Time flies.
Yeah, time really does fly. And ladies and gentlemen, I might be biased when I say this, but this is the inimitable, the handsome Mayor of Waterloo, Quentin Hart.
Oh my goodness. Reverend Funches, thank you so much. As our Executive Director of Human Rights for the City of Waterloo, and to Kathy and to Mayor LaTanya and Dr. I don't know if I could be on a better panel tonight to discuss some of the concepts of this book. I am so grateful to be here. I'm so thankful. And keep on. This one, and we need to continue to do this and open up this dialogue and discussion. So I want to thank the panel and for everyone that is willing to speak up for these issues.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we want to begin with our first question now, because we know people are itching to start discussing the book and their book reads and whatnot. The first question that we want to ask of each of you is this one. What was an aha moment for you as you were reading the book, and particularly the chapters that you were assigned? We'll begin with you, Kathy Young.
What shocked me the most is getting to the very end of the book and learning that Ibram Kendi has stage 4 colon cancer. And that became a real metaphor for him for racism. One of the things I admired most about this book is Kendi is so honest about himself and can say things without making others defensive, I believe, because none of us are perfect people. And he does not put himself on display as such. And I had grown to like him very much, and I felt horrible that he has such serious cancer, and pray that he can stay well enough to continue this work.
Yes, yes, indeed. We'll come back to that. But yeah, I have some thoughts about that too. Let me see, LaTanya Graves, same question. Aha moment, shocking moment?
Shocking is that if you have not made policy change, then you're not an activist. So what does that say about all of the people for generations that have been engaged in their communities fighting for change?
Did you interpret what he was saying as a negative or a positive? Or?
Yes, because in my opinion, just because you have not enacted policy change, your community actions is what has you out there daily fighting for change. And without your community activism, then policy change is not going to happen.
Yeah, we'll come back and talk about that a little bit more too. That's very provocative what you just said. I thought he said that an activist is one who has created policy change or one who has power. And apparently it's a space recognized power that the activist has. We'll come back and talk about that a little bit more, but we appreciate the comment. Mayor Rob Green, something shocking, something that just caused you to go, aha?
For me, it was an aha. I was a government major in college, focused on public policy, and I was really intrigued by his saying, I had it on page 208, to fight for mental and moral changes after policy is changed means fighting alongside growing benefits and the dissipation of fears. The idea that you don't wait to try to change people's minds and change people's culture before policy. In most cases, when change has occurred, it's been a change in policy first, and then the public follows, or the sentiment follows. And I would just follow that with another fantastic book I read called Leadership in Turbulent Times, which talks about President Johnson, and the Civil Rights Act. And it just floored me, like how much resistance there was publicly to that. And now today we take it as, oh, of course we did that. So man, as a public policy official and somebody who's an influencer, it sure makes me see that gosh, there's times when you have to focus on the policy and on the people in power, and then just wait for the public to follow along, because otherwise you are not a leader.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the Human Rights or the Civil Rights Act, because clearly 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, those things happen, and then public opinion slowly began to change after they were instituted.
Yeah,
and
I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida.
Resistance. Yes.
I was in desegregated schools in the early 80s, and we never thought about the fact that we were taking a bus across town to go to school. and that we were in an all-Black neighborhood. It's just like, that's how things were. And it was to help us be a more equitable society. So gosh, there's so much to unpack there.
Yeah, it is. Dr. Cissy Bonye.
Yeah, no. I think for me, one of the things that first in reading the book, I had to also make sure that I don't go in with the bias, because when you've done equity work, when you live equity work, when you've been exposed to equity work, you tend to bring yourself when you're reading these books. And so I wanted to take a step back and say, okay, just pause and put aside everything that you've learned, and with a clear mind, just read for objectiveness. And one of the things that really was, I guess, from a positive aha moment was when he talked about that when we transform people and do not show them an avenue of support, we blame their lack of commitment rather than our lack of guidance. And with the health department doing equity work and showing the map, I'm very, I think because I'm comfortable with being uncomfortable. There's assumptions as a leader, like, oh, just try it, just go ahead and try it. But this is not something that has been normalized for people, right? It's not as easy for others. So I think that making those assumptions that people should just go try it freely on their own without the necessary guidance and tools actually can be problematic, can be more problematic, right? And so I think for me, it was a very humbling statement to be able to say, oh, okay, wait a minute. As a leader, here I am making assumptions that there's a lack of commitment, while it's actually, I'm not providing the tools and resources as someone who has been doing this for a number of years, or someone who grew up and exposed to equity work, right? So I think that was a humbling statement.
Wow, it's great. And of course, for those who don't know, Dr. Cissy Bonye just finished a system mapping process with Engage Inquiry. Is that an outfit out of North Carolina? It was absolutely tremendous. I was so thankful to have been involved with you, Doctor, on that. So thank you for the opportunity. Mayor Hart, same question, sir. Did you have an aha moment, something that may have shocked you?
Honestly, this entire read, I think Mayor Green had mentioned unpacking, but and Dr. Nafisa, I tried as hard as I could to separate myself from some of the content. I unpacked so much. When he was talking about his upbringing and about his life and about his parents, it took me back to why my grandmother originally moved to Waterloo. It took me back to so many stories, and the fact that even into this very day in 2020, even the mayor could be called the N-word out in public. And so, I unpacked so much. And it's amazing how, Dr. Ibram could not even be here in Waterloo, Iowa, but that we shared so many similar experiences in different ways and in venues. So, I unpacked a lot. And I'll probably say, out of the many ahas that I got from similar shared experiences, I think one thing that this did do, as Mrs. Young had mentioned a little bit earlier, it gave people an opportunity in a non-threatening way to see how, although we tried our best opportunities to try to change things, it showed people where they fit at in the actual pendulum. Because normally when you see an anti-racist, you believe that there's a finger that's pointed directly at you. You are this. But it took a step back in, I call it small bites, to show people how you are part of what we actually need to change in a way that's non-threatening, and a way that doesn't necessarily blame you, but help you to be able to figure out ways to move beyond that, move past that, and change things. So that was my aha, but I was touched by this book on so many levels.
Wow, well, that takes us into our second question then, and this has been really good discussion so far. Your reflections are invaluable. I'm sure that those who are reading the book are really going to dig into some of these nuggets that you've been sharing here. But Reverend Dr. Kathy Young, let's go back to you now and just try to ascertain then, what was it about the read that really disturbed you, perhaps? It was another thought, in addition to the shock that you received upon learning that he was suffering with 4th-stage colon cancer, that really moved you in a way that you hadn't anticipated.
What I would say was his statement that we will never get anywhere. And from my perspective, racism has gotten more overt. I would say racism has increased recently in America. Otherwise, the media, we're seeing more, but it really concerns me that racism is deep, it's not talked about. And if we just try to heal the symptoms, my grandchildren and your grandchildren are going to be back doing the very same thing we're doing. And that we have to affect policies in order to make changes. My biggest question is, how are we going to do that as a community? The whole idea to think globally but act locally. I don't want us to just read this book, have formed some new friendships those are important things, but those get at symptoms, not the heart of the problem. And we have got to change policies, but we need to do it in the most strategic and wise ways possible.
Yeah, what I hear when you say that is that we can't legislate love, but we can certainly legislate behavior.
Yes, we can. And that people will, in turn, come along in time. People are making a big deal of not wanting to wear masks right now, but everybody got used to wearing seatbelts. And,
wonderful.
Redlining laws, redlining is against the law, but we need to go further and help people who don't normally use banks to use them, because in the whole PPP loans, people of color were at such a disadvantage because they didn't have relationships with banks.
Yeah.
And we have to do some systemic changing to make lasting impact on racism.
Absolutely. Thank you. And it looks like we have about 10 minutes left. We're going to go to LaTanya Graves. Was there something that was disturbing to you even? Something that bothered you about the reading?
Well, we have so many programs and services in place, and it said we formulate and populate and donate to cultural and behavioral and educational enrichment. And it's like, it doesn't matter, but it does matter because we're changing lives. And so, I disagree with that. He said, is it helping or hurting? And it's helping. The only way it's hurting is when those people that truly need the services aren't receiving the services.
You didn't like Kendi, did you?
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I wouldn't say that. I just have my opinions about different things. That's all.
Right. If I told you, by the way, that he defined activists as one who has power or engaged in policy change, would that change your initial thought about the way he defined an activist?
No, because he said if a person has no record of power or policy change, then that person is not an activist. And I don't feel you have to have a record of power or policy change, because if it wasn't for the community activists, the change wouldn't have taken place to begin with.
Well, we'll take it. I'll take that. All right, Ms. Latanya Graves. Mayor Rob Green. And of course, we want to try to be as sensitive to time as we can. I'm hoping that they will give us a few more minutes since we have such an illustrious panel tonight. But Mayor Rob Green.
Well, there are certain parts of the book overall I disagreed with. Just for some of the language. Sometimes I saw some inflammatory language, and as I was writing it down, I took lots of notes, but there were a few X's that I had, and like, I don't necessarily agree with this, how this is put. One of the things that he brings up, and it's toward the end of the book, he talks about Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C. and shutting down traffic and what are civilly disobedient motions. And of course, I'm coming at this as a mayor, as a city mayor. So I have to look at it from both sides of not wanting disruption, but also the challenge for me was seeing the quote from King came to mind is, true peace is not merely the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. And what challenges me is that I think in Cedar Falls community, we tend to think, oh, we're not having demonstrations this week, or it's quiet, so things are okay. No, they're not okay. It's just, there's no demonstrations this week. And we have to continually take action and keep moving forward and show progress, or what will we expect to happen?
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting.
Not that I'd condone it, but I'm a realist too.
Fabulous. Dr. Cisse Bonye.
Well, I had to write a note to myself as I was reading, because one of the very first things that he says turned me completely off, and I had to really wire myself to read, and is that he no longer believes that Blacks cannot be racist. And for me, that was the, oh my goodness, what are you saying here? I do not believe that Black people can be racist. Racist is one who is both privileged and socialized on the basis of a racist system, right? So on a basis of whiteness being superior. And so for me, that was something that was offensive. It was just something very hard for me to get over, because again, I'm like, this is a community read that's going on. I don't want this notion, like, or this idea that Black people can be racist. Black people cannot be racist. I think what he didn't really define in this book is how internalized racism has an impact and contributes to racist ideas, right? And so, it's something that also, as an African, I'm very intentional when I see my African immigrant brothers and sisters, maybe having a different perspective on what's going on in America. And I have to bring that to their attention, that you are internalizing the stereotypical view, just the way you would do with your own ethnic tribes back home. So you have to be very conscious and aware of what that system is doing. I want to also emphasize that, yes, he talks a lot about policy, but policy change without accountability has no point, right? And so very often in organizations, we have policies about diversifying, policies about intentionally recruiting people of color, policies about, or getting funding for program development, but we fail to talk about accountability. So once you have these policies, how do you hold organizational leaders accountable? How do we hold our elected officials, I'm sorry, I love you all, but accountable, right? Because that is what will help ensure that the policy is really active. So I think those were the two things that I really wish that one, I wish that he never wrote that Black people can be, he no longer believes that Black people cannot be racist. But secondly, I think that if he also had spent so much time, more time on accountability, I think that would have made this book richer.
And very quickly, I want to get to Mayor Hart, of course, but very quickly, do you know him personally?
Not personally, but I would say this: he is a good colleague of one of my matron of honor, Dr. Kelly Carter Jackson, who is a historian at Wesley College, who is actually writing about this book. So
Okay.
it's a very close-knit circle.
I just think it's so illustrative when people disagree with the book, and definitely take on Kendi when so many beautiful people actually liked the book. So there was something about the way he was dressed, I assume, that you did not like that time when you met him personally. Let me go to you, Latanya Graves. I just want to ask you the same question, by the way, because we learn a lot when people disagree with the author. Do you agree with Dr. Cissé Ebonye, though, that Black people can't be racist?
I totally agree. I was
Totally agree with that.
Totally agree.
So you take issue with everything. You don't like the way he defines activists. You just don't even like the way he write. Did he use the right color ink when he printed this book?
He may have used the right color ink. However, again, and I cannot stress it, without community activism, you're not going to see change. I don't care how you slice it. If we're not out there, we're not going to see change.
Well, I just appreciate you all pointing out some things that maybe others of us are taking for granted. So we appreciate you sharing that. Mayor Hart, sir, you have the last few words here. Was there anything, though, that really shocked you or took you aback, something that moved you in a way that you didn't really anticipate?
Man, it's 6:59 and I get to go last. I need, look, so what the doctor said, I'm in agreement with that. But when I take a look at the overall book, what I tried to do was grab nuggets that I could utilize in the work that I do. And I also took a look at where, I may come short in certain situations. He talked about feeling driven versus outcome driven. Dr. Nafisa, you are an outcome driven person. Yes, you have the feelings, but working with you in the systems mapping, you wanted to take a holistic approach to not just talking about the problems, but how we're going to move to change systematically the barriers to health and health equity that we see within our community. Latanya, I've worked with you as well. And when we're talking about policing and putting things in ordinances that make sure that everyone is treated fairly, or working with systematic policies for change that will give a fair opportunity for everyone to be successful. And Mayor Green, recently you talked about redlining, as Mrs. Young had mentioned. So when I take a look at the overall book, I grab some of those particular nuggets and try to take a look at how I do my job, because yes, I don't necessarily know if a Black person can be racist, but I do know that we can continue to perpetuate structures that we may not be aware of to put people at a disadvantage. So I think the conversations, we want equality, but equality does not equate to equity. Equity is giving people what they need to be successful, and that's not always equal. It was mentioned a little bit earlier about having banks and people developing relationships with banks. But I think what we do, we take a look at the exterior of that problem, but we don't realize the systematic oppressive policies that are within banks that disqualify African Americans and African American businesses and minority businesses so that they can't even get a bank loan to open a business. So when I looked at this, and Abraham, you and I are meeting tomorrow, I got a list of about 7 to 8 policies, practices that I was able to kind of take a look at the scope of this book and identify shortcomings to where we can actually make the type of change that we need to make on so many areas. So yeah, as mayor, if I'm supporting practices and I don't do anything to try to change those, I don't have the whole structure to be able to change myself. But I believe that we need to work towards changing that. So Tanya, to your point, with regards to this book, sister, you can never be a failure. I've saw your work on the front lines to try to change the systematic policies, practices, and give equity into people's lives. So I didn't necessarily take that from the book, but we all saw it from our own perspective. But those that are out there on the front lines trying to change, what this book helped me do is to figure out systematically the type of changes that we need to take in order to create the equity and give people a successful opportunity in here. His conversation about the achievement gap, right? Who is successful? There were barriers put in place for over 100, 400 years where African Americans were not allowed to read and write. So yes, there's going to be an achievement gap from 100 to 0. And then he talks about in the 1990s and 2000s, how that gap has shrunk. And so we need to address those systematic barriers, quit talking about it, but figure out how we can address them. We need activists, we need structural change, we need all those pieces to be successful, to make sure that my children, your children, and that people can be successful. So this book has me fired up, not that every word he said was true, but for the work that we need to do to get things done. So, everybody on this call, I consider you anti-racist for the work you've done. And that's what I got from the book. So we got a lot of work to do. And this helps identify people in this puzzle. But I got a lot from this book myself, personally.
Well, we're going to have you come back and tell us how you really feel in another panel discussion, Mayor Hart. We appreciate that.
We can give him one more
for
minute.
all of you all who are on the panel, you are all winners. You're all winners. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you have a wonderful time in your book reads. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for attending, everybody.
Thank you.